Good afternoon. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Thursdays with Friends. I believe this is episode 38. Thursdays with Friends is our online conversation on current issues. In Washington, faith-based lobbyists like FCNL find ourselves Davids in competition with lobbying Goliaths. Research by Open Secrets reveals that 13 faith-based organizations spent $3.7 million to lobby Congress in FY21, using a total of 63 lobbyists. On contrast, the lobbying Goliaths deploy hundreds of lobbyists, many of them former members and staff of Congress, spend hundreds of millions of dollars on behalf of special interest groups. Lobbying Goliaths, however, do not have what FCNL has, which is a network of persistent grassroots advocates who actively lobby their members of Congress. We'll discuss their impact today, especially in our hyper-partisan Congress. I'm the show's producer, Wesley Wolfbear-Pinkham, and here's our chat host for Thursdays with Friends, FCNL General Secretary Diane Randall, and her guest, Jim Cason, FCNL's Associate General Secretary for Strategic Leadership.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us at this Thursdays with Friends. I'm thrilled to be back with you again and very excited that Jim Cason is my guest. Many of you know Jim from a whole variety of things he has done with FCNL, but currently he is the Associate General Secretary for Strategic Advocacy here at FCNL. I want to start off talking a little bit about a question that I often get asked, which is, why does FCNL lobby the way it lobbies? And what is a Quaker lobby anyway? Because in fact, people have said to me, that's an oxymoron to have a Quaker lobby. And Wesley just highlighted what we know to be true, that there is a lot of money spent on lobbying. But we have kind of a secret power, and that secret power is you. It's the people across the country who advocate with us. And it's also our faith. It's our faith and practice of coming to this work of looking for that of God in every person, of knowing that it is essential for us to be persistent, to be prophetic, and to even be sometimes relentless in how we approach people. And so today we're going to learn a little bit more about that approach. Jim is one of the people who has helped cultivate the training and the engagement of people all across the country. And one of the things that I think we both believe and share, and I'm going to ask Jim to speak to, is the impact of grassroots lobbying, both on the impact on Congress and on congressional offices, but the impact that this advocacy has on the people who do it and the people who engage. So let me just say welcome, Jim. I'm thrilled to be talking with you for the next half hour.
Well, thank you, Diane, for inviting me on Thursdays with Friends. And I really want to start, first of all, by just saying thank you to all of you who are on this gathering today, because it really is your advocacy and your financial support that makes this work possible, that makes our community really be able to work together. And I think, when people ask me about what is the secret sauce, what's the FCNL approach, it really does start with our faith and our faith practice, and the idea that we are going to approach our engagement with everybody, including members of Congress, including congressional staff, with an understanding that we want to try and actively listen. We want to try and understand where that other person is coming from. We want to understand and listen and see if we can discern the light of God in that other person. And Diane, you said something which I have really come to understand so much better in the last few years, which is that we provide a structure of support for friends around the country, but a lot of the support, the growing edge of our work really is the ways in which friends and like-minded folks in different parts of the country support each other. And that support is absolutely critical. And there are so many stories that we could take hours to talk about how friends have really felt like doing this work out of a place of faith in order to try and make change in Washington has also changed them. I can remember someone telling me a few years ago that, doing this advocacy work, Jim, has made me a better Quaker, has made me understand better how I want to walk into the world. And there are other folks that I remember a couple of people who are professional counselors who said, you know, what's interesting is we took some of our counseling into advocacy, but some of the work that we're doing as a community that we're not just learning, by the way, from FCNL staff, but we're learning from each other. We're taking back into our counseling together. And, you know, I'll just end, because I know I could talk for a long time, as that I'm always reminded about something that Ruth Flower said. She, in a video that she did with, I forget who it was with, but she said, you know, whenever Ruth Flower, who of course is this very famous lobbyist we had who had done lobbying for decades, whenever I'm nervous, I always remember that part of our lobbying is also recognizing as we go into a meeting that, and taking a pause and saying, you know, God is in this room, and we just have to pause and see what we're being led to do. And I think that's so important. So I'll stop there, Diane.
Thanks, Jim. I agree. So that was Quaker Speak that interviewed Ruth for that. And it was a great interview talking about Quaker lobbying. One of the questions, another question that we often get, that I know you get a lot too, is the polarization issue. Congress is, if you're following the up-to-date, I don't mean you, because I know you follow the up-to-date news, but if our participants today are following up-to-date news, you know that we're expecting a pretty big vote today, tomorrow, sometime in the next 2 or 3 days over an issue that has been fairly acrimonious, actually, fairly partisan, this question of President Biden's proposed Build Back Better plan and the big infrastructure bill. So we're going to put a link in the chat later about action people can take on that. But it's taken us a while to get there because there is a lot of partisanship. And one of the things I love about working at FCNL is that while we certainly are aware of the partisanship, it doesn't change the way we behave. And so I want to ask you to talk a little bit about that and how you see that working for constituents across the country and how you see it working in our work on the Hill, in FCNL's work on the Hill.
Thanks, Diane. And I would say that, you know, of course, we read the papers, and we hear the comments. I think and it goes back to the approach to advocacy. I think that the approach to advocacy that has actually over the last decades, and particularly as those of you around the country have built out this work, we've developed a reputation as a group that talks to everybody. And that also gives us a comparative advantage. We don't start by trying to achieve a comparative advantage. We start with our faith. But that faith practice gives us a comparative advantage in that we can go in and talk to everybody, and we're respected by lots of people. So Amelia Keegan, who leads that lobbying on the Build Back Better bill, really is often asked, can't you get someone in this state, or can't you get someone in this other state? Because they know that our folks have access to offices that frankly some of our allies can't go into anymore. And that work is super important. And I would just say that one of the things that we've really built out that I'm not sure we really appreciate as much, or friends around the country may not appreciate, is we've got this team of 12 professional lobbyists working the Hill that really are figuring out what's happening. And then they're working with thousands of people around the country that have this practice of advocacy to go into every office, maybe an office we agree with, it may be an office we don't agree with, but we understand something from that office. And, you know, one example I would give on a slightly different issue is recently we heard from one senator who expressed concern that Senator Jack Reed from Rhode Island, who steers a really critical military policy bill, is under a lot of pressure to not allow many votes on a military policy bill that's coming up. And this other senator said, you know, Senator Reed really needs some support. And we were able to go to Rhode Island and talk to others in the faith community, a group of rabbis, some nuns, some other folks, and say, hey, would it be possible to give Senator Reed some support at this critical moment so that he can allow space for this vote to happen? And I'm seeing that happen in Indiana, in Arizona, in West Virginia, and all over the country. You know, Senator Manchin has been in the news a lot recently for good, and sometimes people have been very critical of him for what he's done. And I would note that recently our advocacy teams in West Virginia persuaded Senator Manchin, after a long time, to become a co-sponsor of legislation we've been working on that would repeal a law that authorized the US invasion of Iraq, the 2002 authorization for the use of military force. This didn't happen by accident. This happened because a group of people in the state over time kept meeting with the senator's staff, kept showing the kind of support that was there, and kept engaging. Sometimes they were rebuffed, but they kept staying engaged, and ultimately the senators felt like this is a thing I can do. Now, I'm not going to pretend in a polarized Congress that we're always going to persuade members of Congress to do something that friends have asked us to do. There are lots of times when members of Congress have their mind made up. We have had a few times when members of Congress have told us literally, you changed my mind. But many times that act of quiet engagement over time, you use the word relentless, which I really like, that persistent, relentless engagement in a respectful, active listening manner is really creating community with members of Congress. That one other example I'll just throw in there is Senator Chuck Grassley, not always someone who agrees with FCNL, but folks in Iowa have been talking to his office for many, many years. There are, as he said to them early on, there are times that I'm going to agree with you and there are times we're not going to agree. I hope we always have some times when we agree. Sentencing reform, we were big supporters of what he was doing, and he was very instrumental in that issue. He also, much to the surprise, frankly, of the lead sponsors of this same legislation on the war authorization, became an original co-sponsor of that bill. And he did it. He told the folks in Iowa because of the work that folks had done in Iowa. He told them before he told the people who he was going to co-sponsor with. So I think there's openings to do this because of our practice of advocacy.
Jim, one of the things that FCNL has done is built out, really encourage some people who are willing to try to be that persistent voice and work with a particular office. So kind of a really deeply building the relationship on an individual basis. And sometimes those are people who've worked in the political campaigns or even been donors to their political campaigns. But sometimes it's just through the sheer educational work that they've done where they've built a relationship. I'd love to have you tell a story about that, but I also want to get to the advocacy teams because I know we have people on this call who are part of advocacy teams around the country who really support one another in addition to working directly with FCNL staff and reaching out to their congressional offices. They talk on the phone once a month, sometimes more. They get advice from each other. They hear directly from members of Congress, and they've gone through a particular kind of training. So can you talk about both those ways of how we get to people, and how does that compare to what we know is the competition we have from lobbying that is, putting bundles of money forward to elect people?
No, I'm reminded that, you introduced Chris Murphy on an advocacy team call not a long time ago. And Senator Murphy said very directly, look, we need the friends. We need FCNL because there's not a lot of money in lobbying against military spending, but there is a lot of money in lobbying for military spending. And the first program, just to start with your first question, is we have developed just in the last 2 or 3 years this grass tops advocacy program, which people always tease me, but there are folks in our network who literally have the cell phone numbers of members of Congress. And our lobbyists will tell you that it makes a huge difference if you can actually directly reach a member of Congress, kind of skip past the staff and say, hey, here's something I think would be important. Because when you're a senator, you have 45 staff. You don't have, the individual staff people don't have that much time with that senator. And so our ability to have different leaders in states connect with members of Congress directly and actually bring an issue to them is really important. Also, one example I would have is recently, I think it was in the state of Delaware, we were working with a pastor who had a food pantry, and we were able to arrange a time for one of the Delaware senators to come to that food pantry and then have that conversation about the importance of federal government support for food stamps and the importance of the child tax credit. And that gives then that senator the experience to go back onto the floor of the Senate and say, this is what I'm seeing in my local area. And I can tell you, Amelia does most of this lobbying, but every once in a while she lets me out. And I had a conversation, I joined a call with the White House a couple of weeks ago, and they were very clear that this Build Back Better package was moving forward because people of faith around the country were engaged. And they specifically said FCNL and named about 5 other faith communities that they said that kind of advocacy is key. And you also asked about the advocacy teams. And the point I would make here is that with 126 teams around the country in about 44 states, we are really able to bring members of Congress into conversation and get members of Congress onto legislation. That bill that I referred to earlier, I think there's something like 42 co-sponsors right now of that legislation. 39 of those co-sponsors are people that FCNL folks have met with around the country. Now, I'm not saying all 39 signed on to the bill because FCNL advocacy teams met with them, but I can tell you that in a number of cases, the teams knew they were going to co-sponsor that legislation before the lead co-sponsors knew. And that says to me that these senators are feeling like they have the support to do something because they've got the support of our teams around the country. And frankly, it's creating a little bit of a problem for us because now we have all these other groups that are saying, can't you get your advocacy teams to work on this and this and this? And so, but it is a real blessing to have this community of people around the country. And beyond advocacy teams, as the slide Wesley just put up says, this year, and really, Diane, I would say this is something that you have really built out over the last 10 years. And I just think that's important to read. Through October, FCNL constituents have met with 90 of 100 Senate offices. Now, I want us to get to the other 10 Senate offices in the next 2 months, and 148 of 435 House offices. And so we're getting there. But we have more work to do. We have more work to do to build out our advocacy around the country. And I'll just come back to what I said at the beginning. That's where your financial support to keep us steadily engaged in this is also important, because it does take time, takes work to build these teams around the country. I'll stop there because I know I'm going on.
Well, we have a lot of great stories to share about people who do work with us, but I want to take a pause just now and say that if people on the call have questions, please put them in the chat to ask Jim about. Stephen has put a couple of connections into the chat. One is about learning more about advocacy teams and how to join them. Maybe you yourself aren't ready to be part of an advocacy team, but maybe you know someone in your community who would like to. We don't quite yet have one in every state, but that is our goal because we would like to be able to get to all senators. And of course, we want to build up our support with all the House districts too. So we have a ways to go, but your support really makes a difference. Your outreach and connecting us to people in your community, as Jim said, as well as your financial support. We do have a legislative ask though, Jim. I want you to talk a little bit about that. You've talked about Amelia's lead on the Build Back Better bill, which is part of a reconciliation package. And as I said earlier, I talked to Amelia just about an hour ago, and I said, are they voting? And she said, it could happen tonight, it could happen tomorrow. But this has been somewhat of a contentious bill. FCNL has really focused on assuring that the child tax credit would be in the bill, that it would include full refundability, so the lowest income people would have it available to them, and that it would not require people to be working to receive this, because often people are between jobs or they have some kind of crisis that doesn't allow them to work. So this is a huge program for addressing childhood poverty, but there is so much in that bill that we care about. So talk a little bit about that right now, that this legislative act, action and how our constituents have been involved in this, because we have a really great story to tell about this.
Thanks, Diane. And really, we often use the T word with this legislation. This is transformational. We have members of Congress who are literally saying, this is once in a generation, maybe once in a lifetime. Congress is going to make the kind of investment that, by some estimates, just the action on the child tax credit, if it was made permanent, would cut child poverty by 40% in this country. Just think about that, cutting child poverty by 40%. And as you just said, this legislation is going to be voted on by the House. We think sometime this week, maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow, maybe I know I talked to a House office earlier today. They're changing their airline flights because I think it may take a little longer, but they're going to vote on it this week. Then 2 weeks from now, we're going to have 600 people here in Washington virtually, and the Senate is going to take up the same legislation. And at every stage of this legislation, there is going to be pressure to try to cut out some of these benefits. And one of the things we're worried about is that they might reduce that benefit from the child tax credit that you described that really provides help for children and families. And it helps over 80% of families in this country, but particularly helps the poorest families who maybe aren't even paying taxes, but need the money the most. And so our ability to stay engaged with this over the last year, we brought grass tops in to talk to members of Congress in specific states. We've had folks writing letters to the editor. We've had folks writing op-eds in Arizona and West Virginia. We've had folks also quietly talking to Republicans to say, we know you might not vote for this bill, but we hope you'll tell the leadership that this is important, this child tax credit provision. And I can tell you that also makes a difference. So that work is vital. I would just encourage all of you, if you haven't written a letter to your representatives, go ahead and write one now and use that relentless idea. Keep writing. After the House votes, write your senators again and say, this is coming from the House. I want to make sure that this actually gets through the Senate and gets through quickly, because as you've been reading in the papers, it could easily get delayed. As you know, one of our former lobbyists said often, if Congress has a choice between yes, no, or delay, it often chooses delay. And we can't let this happen because these provisions actually expire at the end of the year. The child tax, if they don't act, they will run out. And the last thing I'll just say that you can do to help is our annual meeting and Quaker Public Policy Institute. We are going to have close to 500 people virtually lobbying members of Congress. It is not too late for you to sign up for annual meeting and to join us. We'll train you, we'll put you together with other folks in your state, and we will train you how to go into congressional offices and make a difference on this issue that the Senate is likely to be voting on when you are lobbying. So the timing couldn't be better.
It is amazing. And I just want to note that Justin Hurdle, who did put the states where we don't have advocacy teams in the chat, and a request to contact us if you have any leads in those states. We will follow up with them and ask them if they're interested in starting a team. I also just want to note that Justin is one of our staff people who really has been helping schedule these Hill visits, and it's been really tremendous. And Justin's role in helping us make connections with the grassroots activity that's going on and what we're doing on the Hill. FCNL has invested in some powerful software that allows us to really track information pretty closely and have very up-to-date information about the congressional offices, share that with our network, and then vice versa, share what's happening on the Hill with our network as well. So I think that's one of the strengths that we've really developed. Another strength that FCNL has developed that we've had many friends on this call and around the country be excited about is our young adult work. And this young adult work isn't just about talking to young adults, it's about getting them engaged in advocacy. And so we have an advocacy core program that Larissa Gil-Sanhueza at FCNL heads up. But Jim, you're vitally involved in that. So talk a little bit about what that group is focused on. Larissa's been on before, but a little bit about how they interact with our advocacy on the Hill here and what difference it makes to have that network of people across the country who are young adults doing this work and who also come to our spring lobby weekend.
And Diane, thanks for teeing that up. I just want to mention in terms of the data that when you file a lobby report, it often leads our lobbyists to follow up with that office. So those lobby reports, that interaction, that investment we've made in that is just super, super important right now. On the young adult program, I would argue that the young adults in our network are the most courageous people that in our entire network, because we've got young adults in very tough states who are going in and talking about immigration or talking about environmental justice. And they're using the kind of tools that we talked about at the beginning, that Quaker practice to go in and lobby with people who don't agree with them, but to look for what's the space that we can open up. And the advocacy core, I just couldn't be more amazed by what they're doing. It's 18 young people in about 15 states that are spending 10 months and lobbying for a bill that is called the Environmental Justice for All Act, which really is building up support for federal action to address the consequences of climate change, and specifically the way in which those consequences are concentrated in communities of color and poor communities in this country. And this legislation is really a marker that helps to create the space, if you will, for that kind of investment. President Biden is trying to make those investments, but frankly, he's getting pushback from Congress. And so we're, in a way, creating that space to do that. And the advocacy core is just so essential to that work. We're working with Clarence Edwards, our lead lobbyist, on that. The opportunity, again, and you'll see that I'm always wanting to give you all opportunities. If you know young people around the country, I really want to encourage you to be in touch with us. Young people that you might want to encourage not only to apply for the advocacy corps, but also our signature spring lobby weekend. We're going to be back in person here in Washington, D.C., March 12th to 15th, 2022. And we want to bring 400 or 500 people to Washington to make a statement and to push for legislation that will take the next step towards a pathway for citizenship for undocumented people in this country. And this opportunity for a lot of you is, if you know a young person or a group of young people, think about supporting them to come to Washington for Spring Lobby Weekend. Think about if you went to college somewhere and you know you're still connected to that college, could you introduce folks in that college to sending a delegation to Spring Lobby Weekend? And if you have specific ideas of people who might do this, I would encourage you to reach out to Larissa. I think we're going to put her email address in the chat just now. But if we are working on 60 college campuses around the country to talk about Spring Lobby Weekend and these other opportunities for young adults to get involved. And we would love you to help us do that. So please get in touch with us if you have specific ideas of people that you might invite to do this, or people you might sponsor to come to Spring Lobby Weekend.
So you probably are tracking everything in the chat, Jim, but I love the chat. We have a staff person and John Alder from Sopigan who volunteered to start the advocacy team in Hawaii. So thank you very much. That's great. I may join you after the first of the year. So the other thing in the chat is the question of young adult. What is young? And because we know that as many of us get older, we tend to think we're still young. But Justin also put in the chat the information that for Spring Lobby Weekend, it's really designed for young adults. I mean, as Jim just noted, we are really reaching out to people on college campuses. We do occasionally get students in high school, and we also get people who are post-college, but pretty much under 30 is really the group we're reaching out to. And we have a link to a young adult page on our website for the programs, the various programs we have in addition to Spring Lobby Weekend and the Advocacy Corps. We, of course, have a program assistant program and a summer intern program. So maybe one of our colleagues can put that in the chat as well. And Jim, I got to tell you, we're out of time, believe it or not. We could talk a long time about the various programs we have and how we strategically connect with people around the country to support the advocacy of FCNL. but I'd love to give you an opportunity to offer some closing remarks before we sign off for the day.
Well, I'll just end where we began. I think the key is practice. Think about, do you want to find 2 friends and go on a lobby visit? If you do, send us an email at lobby@fcnl.org. I'm sure Justin can put that in the chat as well. And we'll help you do that first lobby visit. We have found that if people go on a first lobby visit, then they can also go on another one and another one. And whether you want to lobby with an advocacy team, or you know someone who wants to be with the advocacy core, or you feel led to go back to your meeting and talk about these issues and figure out ways that people can get engaged, or you want to lobby on climate change or another issue, we really want to support you in doing this work that is so important for the priorities of Friends. It's so important, I think, for our democracy writ large. And I also think that I've found, and I've heard from other people, it's so important for our own individual personal lives and our own practice. So thank you, Diane. And thank you also to all of the donors, because really this would not be possible without your financial support as well as your advocacy.
Amen to that. Let me just say thank you again for joining us this afternoon for Thursdays with Friends. As Jim stated, and I think we put this information in the chat, our annual meeting is coming up in a couple of weeks. So we will not be having another Thursdays with Friends in November. The next one will be December 2nd. And my guest then will be Stephen Donahoe, who is Director of Development here at FCNL. And we'll be talking about some of the highlights of this year and really some of the highlights maybe of the past decade. Because the December 2nd Thursdays with Friends will be my last Thursdays with Friends before I finish my work at FCNL at the end of this year. So again, delightful to see so many of you and also some new people I haven't seen recently. So thanks for being with us. I hope to see you at annual meeting and again on December 2nd. Bye.